Hello, everybody. We are going to get started because we have a lot of information to get through today. So I am Anna Anderson. I am from Disability Rights Wisconsin, and I'm also the co-chair for the Disability Vote Coalition, in addition to Jenny Nugert from the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities. So first off, I'm really happy that everybody could be here today. This is a really, in my opinion, and lots of other people's, I think, a very necessary webinar, lunch and learn today, and hopefully we can learn a lot together. And so I'm going to start off and just tell everybody a little bit about what the Disability Vote Coalition is. I'm probably going to like speed through these because the actual meat of our presentation today is later in these slides. So go ahead, Jenny. Okay, so what are we? So many of you might know who we are, but if you don't, we're a nonpartisan group of people, and we meet and we work very hard to help ensure full participation in the entire electoral process of voters with disabilities. And that can look, the process is actually can be long and complicated, and we try to make it a little shorter and a little less complicated. So that the process includes registering to vote, casting a vote, and accessing polling places. Again, the coalition is coordinated by Disability Rights Wisconsin and the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities. We have over 40 community partners. We have also a large group of people that are self-advocates, and then basically community members that are interested in issues related to voting with disabilities. The next two bullets are basically our contact information and where you can find out more about the Disability Vote Coalition. We are going to make these slides available after the presentation today, so we'll make sure to do that. We'll put them up on our website, and they'll be available there. Next. Thanks, Jenny. Why is voting important? So it's constitutionally protected, and it's a right that people have unless it's expressly taken away by a judge, and we will get to that later in the presentation. It's a chance to choose decision makers and people that will decide on things that are important to you. And so a lot of the people that are friends of ours in the disability community will vote based on issues that impact them and their disability on a regular basis. It's also a civic responsibility. And I think it's a very great responsibility that can be exercised by anybody that has that right. Next. So this is kind of what we're talking about today. It's just a very brief introduction, but why is it important for you to support voting rights? Again, this is for people that are in residential living situations, but also in daily life. So voting is an important resident rights issue. It is a right. It is one that should be practiced if somebody wants to practice that right. People with disabilities who are citizens of Wisconsin have the right to vote unless they have been declared incompetent by a court/judge. All voters, no matter where they reside, have a right to be free of interference, coercion, discrimination, and reprisal in exercising these rights. Those are the same rights that people without disabilities have as well. So those are rights of everybody. Staff in residential care facilities have a responsibility to assist residents in voting. The assistance should be directed by the voter. So whatever assistance they need and ask for, that's what should be provided. We certainly do not condone providing assistance that somebody doesn't, want your help with, obviously. And then the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services they do have some direction that has been given to facilities and residents, talking about the rights of residents to vote and how important that is and how to support people. Next. Here's your eligibility. U.S. citizen. Again, I'm going to go through these fast. U.S. citizen. You must be 18 years old on or before election day. You have to have been at your current address for 28 days prior to the election. You cannot be serving a sentence for a felony conviction, and that includes being on paper. You have to have already fulfilled your, conviction. And you can vote if you have not been determined by a court to be ineligible to vote. Next. Okay, now this is, we wanted to talk about this today because I think some people, and I know some people in residential placement or residential facilities have a developmental disability or have a disability that some people may take one look at and say, I don't think that person should be able to vote. That is, like I like to say, that's none of our business. And the reason it's none of our business is because the only way somebody has their rights removed is by a judge. Or a court, if that's how you want to say it. It is not our decision. That's out of our hands. To me, that's a very great thing. I don't want it in my hands because I don't think that it should be. So no one else can interfere with the right to vote. No one can say, you have dementia. We're not gonna talk to you about voting. I hear that actually frequently, unfortunately, that some people say, this person is too disabled to vote. We're not going to discuss voting with that person. The procedure for removing the right to vote is in Chapter 54 in Wisconsin's guardianship law. So you can always look that up. It's to me, it's very interesting. Rights are retained unless expressly removed. So that means by a court. The standard for removing the right to vote is incapable of understanding the objective of the elective process. It's not anything else. It's not having a robust knowledge of the candidates. Lots of people vote that don't have a robust knowledge of candidates. So there's things like that. An individual who has lost their right to vote can petition the court to have it restored. And we at Disability Rights Wisconsin and the Disability Vote Coalition and a lot of our partners do assist people with petitions to the court to get their voting rights back. Next. Okay, this is another slide that goes pretty well with the last one. Who or what cannot stop a person from voting? And I think this is key. Guardians, family members, friends, care providers, or any other person cannot decide whether somebody can vote or not. The only way to stop a person from voting is for a court to decide. And I know I've been reiterating this over and over again, but I think it's very important, especially for people living in residential settings, because I think there is sometimes with some residents, the feeling, like I said, that they just don't have the ability to vote or to think critically enough to vote. Next. Okay, what is the standard for the capacity to vote? So the standard is imposed on voters not alleged to be incompetent. So not saying they're incompetent. So what's the standard? There isn't one. So you can vote based on a rational analysis of the issues and candidates or on a whim or prejudice, just like the rest of us. Does not require the ability to or interest to do research on candidates, to fact check, to, get information from social media. It's none of those things. It does not require the voter to demonstrate the rationale for their vote or understand how the voting process works. For the vote, and they have to have they don't have to have an understanding of how the voting process works. Next. So the standard for the capacity to vote. So somebody needs to be, I misspoke in the last slide. So somebody does need to be capable of understanding the objective of the electoral process. So understanding that we vote and the people that we elect are now in charge of basically what happens. So there's a very low standard of competency. It's lower, the standard for appointing a guardian is lower. The standard, I'm sorry, is lower than the standard for appointing a guardian. It means that the individual must understand the purpose of voting. That is to vote for the candidate they want to win. And it's that simple. Next. What? Sorry. Okay. And losing the right to vote. So an adult can be found by the court to be incompetent to vote. There's other issues that the court determines whether somebody retains their rights or loses them. But this issue, the court has to determine somebody to be incompetent. The issue of voting does not arise if only a guardian of the estate is being appointed. So if somebody is in charge of somebody's finances, when that's set, that is not that is the right to vote is not dealt with. It's only for the guardianship of the person. A person will lose the right to vote if the court determins that the individual is incapable of understanding the objective of the elective process. So the ward retains the right to vote unless it is specifically removed by the court. If the guardian that's appointed, the person will retain the right to vote unless the court determines that person cannot understand the objective of the elective process and removes the right. I keep repeating myself. Judge, courts. Those are the people that decide, not us. Next. So I'm going to make this really brief. So if you have a resident or somebody you're working with and they don't know if they have the right to vote or not, and that happens, there is a process on figuring that out. But it's very important to pay close attention to this. The letters of guardianship are often the letters that we have in people's files or that people have in their own files at home. The actual document that needs to be looked at is the determination and order on the petition for guardianship due to incompetency. So we gave you an example and the actual document numbers. Next. As you can see on that document, you can look right at number 3, guardian of the person. And under that, it says rights to be removed in full. The last box there, number 3, is register to vote or vote in an election. If that is checked, the right has been removed. So that's the easiest way to determine if somebody has the right to vote. If somebody says, I don't know, and you say, do you want me to help you figure that out? This is what you're looking for. Okay. And next, Jenny, sorry. And then I'm not going to read through this, but because we're going to put our slides on our website, but this is how to obtain a copy of that document if the person doesn't have it, because lots of people don't. Next. You can, like I said before, you can restore the right to vote. And there are sample petitions at the links that we've provided. We've done a lot of work around guardianship and voting issues, and those links are to very comprehensive information. Also, we have a voter hotline, and you can call it at any time, the voter or anybody, and ask us questions. And a lot of the questions we get are about guardianship and voting and getting voting rights back. Next.
Okay, I'm going to jump in at this point. Good afternoon. My name is Janet Zander, and I do the advocacy and public policy work for the Greater Wisconsin Agency on Aging Resources, and I am a member of the Disability Vote Coalition. So jumping in here now for those residents who do have the right to vote and would like to exercise that right, we want to talk about some of the steps here. So starting with registration, particularly for people who may have moved from one residence to another, they're going to be on this list of people who may need to register. They may now live in a new voting district. Certainly any first-time voters are going to need to register for this first time. Maybe someone has moved, but they're just moved down to a new apartment building or across the street. Doesn't matter if it's a new mailing address, they need to register to vote again. Perhaps someone has changed their name. They would also need to get registered. If they haven't voted in over 4 years, the voter registration lists are cleaned off every 4 years. So if somebody hasn't voted during that time, that resident might need to re-register if they now desire to vote. And then, as Anna has been pointing out, maybe somebody had that right to vote removed under a guardianship process, but that right has now been restored. They could now get registered to vote again, as could anybody who has now completed a felony sentence and is what is called off paper, would need to then re-register to be eligible to vote. Next slide, please. So how do they go about getting registered? Well, there's a lot of different options for that. The first is to go to myvote.gov online. Anytime up to 20 days before the election, the registration process could be completed online. You can also help them get registered by mail that's sent to their municipal clerk, again, up to 20 days before the election. The person could actually go in person to the clerk's office or meet up with the clerk in a public location to register in person with the clerk anytime up to 5 p.m. before the day of the election, the Friday before the day of the election, so that week before. If they're voting at their polling place, Wisconsin has a day of voting registration or at the poll registration, so they could actually complete their registration process right at the polling site. For those folks who are residing in a residential facility, we're asking all of you who are, if you're staff in those facilities, to specifically ask new residents if they're registered to vote. It gives them a chance to express their desire to vote so that they're on your radar as somebody who's going to need some assistance. But you can also ask them if they're registered and remind them that they might need to re-register. If they've been registered for many years but are now at a new address, they may need to be one of those folks that needs to get re-registered. And certainly last but not least are those folks who are going to be served by a special voting deputy or SVD who's going to be conducting voting at the facility, recognizing the really small window that is there for people to register through the special voting deputies. And that's only if they're also an election registration official, and not all of our special voting deputies are an election registration official. But additionally, the time registration closes, other than at the polling sites or in the clerk's office, is shorter than the window of time that special voting deputies are coming out to facilities to assist the voters. And in fact, there's only an overlap of 3 days. So many of the special voting deputies, particularly those who are election registration officials, will try to come out to the facilities during that time. but their visits may not align depending on how many special voting deputies are available and how many facilities that they're going to be assisting. So you may need to look at one of the other options to make sure that somebody is getting registered to vote. Next slide, please. So how do they know for sure? Sort of like, how do they know if they have the right to vote? Here we want to know if they need to re-register. So the first place to look again is at My Vote Wisconsin online. They can bring up the address that they're going to be voting from and see if that's in the system. They can confirm that voting address and mailing address both online, and they can update it online. If they're not registered to vote, they are going to want to register, but they're going to, if they're doing it online at My Vote Wisconsin, they're going to have a current photo ID. We'll talk about what that might look like in a little bit. If they're doing the registration by mail, again, up to 20 days before the election, that completed form would be sent to the clerk along with proof of residence. We have a little more detail about that in just a minute. If they're doing it in person, they're going to need to provide proof of residence, and we'll talk about what documents will count for that proof of residence in just a moment. And last, but certainly not least, is at their polling place, bringing proof of residence and a photo ID with them to vote at the polls. Next slide, please. So a little more detail about what's needed to register. So again, online, a driver's license, an ID card. If they're registering using the form that's available on the Wisconsin Elections Commission website, that's linked here on this slide, they will need an acceptable proof of residence document. And again, either a driver's license or an ID card, or here they can also use the last 4 digits of their social security number if they do not have a Wisconsin ID. Next slide. Sort of a little peek here of what that would look like when you go to My Vote Wisconsin. Under registering to vote, you can see inserting name, inserting date of birth. Next slide, please. Along with registration and the proof of resident document is a proof of residence. So where does this person currently reside? You can use your state ID card when you register. If you're doing it by mail or in your clerk's office, you need to bring some sort of proof of residence document. That proof can take a wide variety of forms. We've listed some here, like a utility bill, a lease, a paycheck, a pay stub. Residents could also use a check or some other document that's been issued by a unit of government to show that they are who they say they are. So there's a variety of different options for providing that proof of residence, particularly for people in residential care facilities. An intake document or a contract from the residential facility can be used as proof of residence, and that specific room number for that person is not required. So again, lots of options for providing proof of residence. Next page, next slide. This gives you some example of some of the things that can be used that I just mentioned: checks, leases, bank statements, ID cards, utility bills, and then again, that facility document can be used. Next slide, please. I think this goes over to Anna.
Hello, can you hear me, Janet?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry, everybody. My headset is a mess, and I'm sure you can understand. So now we're going to talk about what people need in order to get an ID to vote. So we know that we have to provide identification at the polls to actually vote, to cast our ballot. It's not true for everybody, so we'll get to that in a second. These are just, I guess, just examples of things you can use for identification. Most people use their driver's license or state ID, but you don't have to. Next, please, Jenny. Okay, so here's a way to get a ID for voting purposes. So you can get it for free through the Department of Motor Vehicles. In order to figure out, I guess, to get more information about what you need to bring to get a photo ID, or where the best location is to go to get one, they have their voter ID hotline there. Not everybody has to bring, if you don't have the necessary documents that you usually need to get like a driver's license, you can get an ID card to use for voting. You don't have to have all that documentation. Otherwise, some people use their birth certificate, their social security card, proof of residence. I bring everything I possibly can to the DMV with me. It just makes more sense to me to not have to go back. But you do not have to have those documents. Next, Jenny. Now, this is what I was saying. Is there anybody that does not need to provide an ID? One group of people are considered to be indefinitely confined voters. And those are voters that have a disability and, vote absentee, and due to disability will be considered a confined voter. That doesn't mean that somebody has to just be in their house all day. It just means that there's a disability. It makes it difficult to vote. Voters in special care facilities, which I think a lot of people on this call today are staff of residential facilities. So this is where we come in with the special voting deputies. There's two that come in. I think there's always two. I could be wrong, but I think there's always two. And those special voting deputies can verify that this person voted, and that satisfies the photo ID requirement, which is great because a lot of people that are in a residential care situation have a hard time getting to the DMV to get, especially somebody, that's recovering in a nursing home, or it's hard to get there to get an ID to be able to vote. There are a group of people called confidential electors, and they're always exempt from photo ID requirements. I'm not going to get into that today. Next slide, Jenny. Thank you. So here we have broken it down into two types of facilities that are eligible to have special voting deputies come in and help residents vote. So first is residential care facilities, and the next we consider to be retirement homes. Next, Jenny. Oh, thank you. Here are the definitions that we have of residential care facilities. I will not read these to you out loud because that would be boring, but they are here for your reference. The residential care facilities are adult family homes, community-based residential facilities, nursing homes, and RCACs, or residential care apartment complex. Next, Jenny. Thank you. So what facilities are qualified to have an SVD come in? So, sorry, excuse me. So there has to be at least, in the residential facility, there has to be at least 5 registered electors of the municipality who are occupants of the facility. So that's kind of a mouthful. But again, 5 registered electors of the municipality who are also obviously occupants of the facility. There also needs to be at least 1 absentee ballot application from an occupant of the facility, and the facility has to have at least 10 residents. Okay, so it's different in a retirement home. So a facility occupied as a primary place of living by 10 or more unrelated individuals. So, if there's 11 people that live there, but one of them is a husband and wife and their brother or something, they're no longer eligible for SVD. Retirement homes may be served by SVDs if the clerk determines that a significant number of the occupants don't have transportation to the appropriate polling place. So a lot of the times that's like in more rural areas and more northern Wisconsin, but also in southern Wisconsin as well. They need assistance in voting, are over the age of 60, or are declared as indefinitely confined electors. Next, Jenny. Thank you. Oh, I'm going to turn it over to Janet.
All right. So I mentioned earlier this sort of short timeline that special voting deputies have to come out to care facilities. As you can see on this slide, those visits have to be or can be started anytime up to 22 days prior to election day. So already we're talking about a fairly small window here, 22 days before the election, when they can even come out. They also have to provide at least a 5-day notice to the facility and to visitors to the facility, indicating that they intend to visit and have these special voting deputies come out. Each group of special voting deputies, and they travel in pairs, may come out up to 2 times. Those notices of when they're going to be coming have to be publicly posted in the facility. So you may see posters, you may be putting those posters up to let your visitors and family and friends who are coming by know that there's going to be voting taking place on a particular day. This voting typically is taking place in a common area so that there's room for the special voting deputies and the voters and any observers that might be there. However, they also could take place in an individual resident's rooms if somebody's unable to come out to the common area to complete that voting. So ideally, they're making up to 2 visits. They cannot make any of those visits after the Monday before election day, which is usually on a Tuesday. So the day before is the last time those special voting deputies would be able to come out to the facility. Next slide, please. So what does that look like? How does that actually work with the special voting deputies? Well, for starters, they're going to be bringing the ballots and envelopes with them. So rather than putting an absentee ballot in the mail to somebody, if they're voting there at the facility, they're going to bring those ballots and applications with them. The special voting deputies can provide assistance to the voters if it's needed. So if somebody needs help marking the ballot, if they need help reading the ballot, if they need to have help signing, any of the things listed on the bullets here, a special voting deputy could do to provide assistance if they're requested to do so. The special voting deputies who are conducting these visits may or may not be able to register them. Remember, again, that time frame that's there. And because they can only do that during the open registration time. And if they're appointed as an election registration official. We've been encouraging more and more special voting deputies to be both, to make sure that that option is more readily accessible in a particular municipality. The window when open registration and the start of absentee voting again is only 3 days. So it's really going to be limited when that occurs. Lastly, special voting deputies, absentee voting may be conducted no earlier than the 4th Monday before and no later than 5 p.m. on the Monday before election day. So we're really talking about a very short period of time that these special voting deputies come in, and it is arranged at a time that also works for the facility and when most of the residents who desire to vote will be available. And so it's not always possible to catch every single person. They try to come back if they've missed someone, but occasionally people miss both special voting deputy options and have to look at some other way to cast their ballot in person or by absentee if there's still time. Next slide, please. So during the special voting deputy visits, there's a particular role that different people play, starting with the role of facility staff. So coordinating that location, I mentioned posting that notice earlier, which would need to be done. Staff are not able to assist the residents with voting if special voting deputies are conducting the voting. So now that responsibility has been delegated to the special voting deputies who are going to be providing whatever assistance is needed. Observers may choose to be there. By state law, one observer from each of the two main political parties is allowed to be present. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't, but it is something they're allowed to do. If multiple teams of special voting deputies are used, then multiple pairs of observers are used. The idea is that they're observing at a distance what the voting that's taking place. So if there's more than one table or area where special voting deputies are performing that work, then observers could also be at each of those locations within the facility. And lastly, family may be present during voting. That family member can assist the resident with voting if, again, just like special voting deputies, if that assistance is requested. And lastly, family can request special voting deputy visit dates and times from the facility. So state law allows them to inquire as to when that is occurring and ask to be notified. Next slide, please. I keep wanting to advance. So again, state law provides that if a voter is unavailable during the two special voting deputy visits, the clerk should send the ballot. There isn't always time, so if the earlier those special voting deputy visits takes place, the more time that allows for the absentee ballot process to take place. We all know that it can take a while for that ballot to arrive if it's being mailed. Clerks may also bring that ballot to the facility if there were individuals who desire to vote who weren't able to meet with one of the special voting deputies. They also retain the option, those residents retain the option to do early or in-person absentee voting, as we call it, by meeting with the clerk in their office or a location available in their communities. And again, could always vote on election day at the polling place. They may need transportation to get there. They'll need to bring documents, particularly if they need for their photo ID and their proof of residence, but they can vote right at the polling sites like anybody else. So just find out what kind of assistance they might need to do that, if that's the option that they are pursuing. We have to make sure that, of course, people aren't voting using multiple options, right? If they voted using the special voting deputies or through an absentee ballot process, we don't want people also going to the polls. But depending on the time frame that's available, they may need to exercise one or other of these options to make sure that their vote is counted. Next slide. If they're doing absentee voting by mail, this could be they missed the special voting deputies. It could be that their facility didn't qualify for special voting deputy assistance. You heard Anna mention some specific criteria, and we have lots of facilities here in the state where those individuals may not, their residents may not qualify for those visits. We even have some nursing homes, not so much in size, but again, how many registered voters are there? How many have requested an absentee ballot? And do they meet that threshold? Which really emphasizes how important it is early on in someone's admission to find out if they have a desire to vote and to create a voting plan for them, but also to make sure that they are registered to vote and get the assistance that is needed. So here in Wisconsin, absentee voting is request-based, so we have to inform people that we desire to vote absentee. Voters would have to submit a written request to the clerk if they wanted to receive a ballot. The voter has to be registered before requesting the ballot, so that's an important step to take care of early on in the admission process. And then last, the voter would need, if they need sort of accommodation, that could be a print ballot. We need to include that information when we send it to the clerk so that they know how to send that ballot over. The absentee ballot will be mailed to whatever mailing address is specified by the voter. We didn't talk a lot about this, but when voter has to reside in a location for 28 days. They may wish, if their time in a facility is shorter than that, or if they've retained a home in another community, they can vote in either of those locations as long as they meet that 28-day time frame. But if not, they can always vote in the place where they intend to return or have maintained a home. And so letting the clerk know where to send that ballot is really important, again, because the time frame is tight. And so we don't want to waste time not getting the ballots to the individual voter as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. Getting assistance, just wanting to emphasize that it is the voter's right, and it is in law that voters have a right to get help that they need in voting, whether it's reading or filling out the ballot, or the absentee return envelope. They can ask for assistance from almost anybody. You can see here on the slide, there are a few exceptions to that. One is the individual helping them can't be their employer. They can't be a representative of the individual's labor union if that applies, or be a candidate on the ballot. Those are the restrictions in terms of who could offer the assistance that people may need. The assistant can also serve as a witness for the voter. So on the absentee ballot certificate, there's a place for the witness to sign. That could be one and the same person. It doesn't need to be, but it certainly could be the same person who's providing any assistance that may be requested. The assistance could include explaining how to fill out the ballot or the return envelope. Sorry, that is not considered assistance. So anybody standing by can say, here's the instructions for completing that ballot, or the instructions for sending back the return. They do not need to sign then as an assister, because they didn't actually physically assist with the actual voting process. If they are an assistant, there is a place on the ballot, on the absentee ballot certification, where that person would need to sign in the location required for the certification of voter assistance section on that ballot. The assistant can read the ballot to the voter, fill it out under their direction, but in no uncertain terms would they be able to tell the person how to vote or to comment on how the person chooses to vote. We want that to be private and independent for the person themselves, unless they're actually asking somebody to check a box for them. If someone signs the voter assistant return envelope on their behalf, they have to make sure that they've also signed that certification of assistance section. And we've quoted here the state statute sections so that those can be viewed at a later date if people would so choose. Next slide, please. So moving from assistance to witnessing the absentee ballot, we've got an actual screenshot here of the absentee ballot certificate, and you can see it's highlighted where the voter themselves would sign and where the special voting deputies would sign, as in this case, the people who've executed that right to vote are signing as those witnesses here. The witnesses have to be at least 18 years of age, and they have to be a U.S. citizen. Again, there are exceptions, but none that would apply here for our residential care facility voters. The witness can verify that you want to make sure that we verified that the completed absentee ballot is done, that all the boxes are checked, the dates are in, everything is in. They need to sign the certificate envelope on the line marked signature of witness. So anybody who witnesses must write their full address underneath the witness signature. The voter or their assistant is going to need to sign and date the certificate on the return envelope and on the line marked signature of voter. Specifically, making sure that they're not a candidate for office, that they have not solicited or advised the voter to vote for or against any candidate, and certifying that their name and address is shown as correct. The witness verifies that the voter completed the absentee ballot, so that's what they're witnessing, is that the ballot was completed. We want to make sure that the voting itself is a private activity and that no one is telling that voter how to vote. Next slide, please. Back to you, Anna.
Okay. So I realized that we scheduled this till 12:45, and it's past that. So we only have maybe 6 slides left, and if you would like to jump off, I understand, but we will be finishing this out. And again, we will have this information up on our website for your review. So we're going to start with the absentee ballot. So this is what the absentee ballot kind of looks like. This is step 3. So the person that is voting, they have to sign as a witness to themselves, I guess. But anyway, saying that they are a US citizen and all of the above in steps 1 and 2 is true. In order to return an absentee ballot, you can do it by mail, which is how lots of people do it. You can return an absentee ballot, but it must be received by the clerk at 8 p.m. on election day to be counted. And if you're going to, if you
Next
are
slide.
a res, what?
The next
Did I do
slide.
the next slide?
There we go. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. I have it up on my computer too. I apologize. So we, if you're going to return it in person to your clerk's office, I recommend that you call your clerk's office in advance to make sure that they're going to be accepting absentee ballots, you know, until whatever time. Because sometimes if you go to a clerk's office, it's closed. You know, there's a lot of different things that could stand in the way. So it's always good to make that phone call. We encourage people to do their absentee ballots and return them ASAP. Janet mentioned there are pretty tight timelines with a lot of these things. The SVDs, definitely, and you got to get your ballot back on time. Oops, sorry, or it doesn't count. The USPS recommends sending it at least one day before election, or sorry, 1 week before election day. But again, we want people, or we encourage people to send it as soon as they can. If a person can't return their own ballot, somebody else, due to disability, somebody else can return it for them to the clerk's office or to the polling place. So you just have to have a disability and somebody can do that for you. And you don't have to prove you have a disability or anything like that. There's also early voting, which is 14 days prior to the election day, and it has to end on no later than Sunday before election day. And there's no voting on that Monday before the election day. Again, call your clerk. You can get that information on myvote.org, which we've included in here. You can get your municipal clerk's email, phone number, location, so you can make sure to talk to them before you go to vote and their location is closed. And then the voter rights to me are one of the most important parts. People have the right to vote privately and independently. Just because somebody's in a residential facility and you know, receiving help in some way, people can still vote, should be able to vote privately and on their own, unless asking for assistance. You should be able to access the polling place in a way that makes sense for you, including, you know, moving around the polling place, getting in, getting to floors where the actual polling place is. So there needs to be an elevator or a way to get to like the second floor if you have that issue. Every polling location has to have an accessible voting machine. I recommend to people that even if you don't have a disability that requires an accessible voting machine, you're still available for your use. And I use it every time I vote. It's very easy. And it makes it more front and center for other people to see that it's necessary and that they can use it as well. And sometimes the machine will be somewhere that's not plugged in or you can't access it or whatever. So if you go there and say, can I use that? And they say, oh, we got to plug that in. That might be really helpful for the next voter that really needs that machine. Everybody has the right to assistance marking your ballot. and you have a right to request an reasonable accommodation, excuse me. So a popular is a chair to sit on if you have mobility issues, a magnifying glass, somebody can assist people with saying their name and address if you have a verbal disability of any kind. So there's a lot of things that people can request that are accommodations that make a lot of sense to make sure that everybody that needs assistance to vote can vote as independently as possible. There's also, lastly, something called curbside voting. Curbside voting is where people can vote curbside. Imagine that. So you're supposed to be able to pull up to a building where the polling place is and say, you know, I can't get out of my vehicle to come into the building. I would like curbside voting. I have a disability. We're working right now on signage to make that more accessible and more known, but that is an option. And then the last couple slides, these are resources that you can use. I'm not going to go through them, but they're resources for people with disabilities and supporting people in the voting process. This is resources for care facilities and providers. I am going to highlight this last one from the Board on Aging and Long-Term Care.
Next slide, please.
What?
Next slide.
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm on mine again. Next slide, please. Okay, we're here. I'm going to highlight the last one, the Board on Aging and Long-Term Care, voting in long-term care settings. I was just alerted to this resource by Janet very recently, and it's comprehensive, and it's just a wonderful resource, easily read, very well done. So I recommend that. I'm also going to just skip through these special elections. There are special elections coming up. Again, look at the PowerPoint on our website as soon as we get it up there. And here's the fall elections. This is statewide elections. So on this slide, you'll see that there's a partisan primary on the 13th. Registration by mail is tomorrow, and that's the deadline. In person, you can register at the polls, and you can also register online by today too. Wednesday or tomorrow, I'm sorry, tomorrow. And then the next election is our general election, November 5th. I think we're probably all aware of that. And if you're not, now you are. You have to register by mail before October, or no later than October 16th. Same with registering to vote online. In person, again, you can do that the day up until the day, the election day. And then I can certainly stay on for questions. I don't want to speak for you, Janet, but I know that you probably have to run. But I also want to take this opportunity to thank Janet Zander for her expertise in this. I really appreciate everything you do, Janet. She's an integral member of the Disability Vote Coalition. So thank you so much, Janet.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. I cannot stay for questions, but thank you, Anna, and I'm sure we'll follow up. Thanks.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you.
There is a question. I don't know if the person's still on, but it says, can we take the paperwork to the town hall if we don't have it to mail in tomorrow?
To like the municipal clerk?
I believe
Lisa. I popped a response in the chat. You can return it to the clerk through August 9th. August 9th is the last day you can register in person before Election Day, or you can, as was mentioned, register at the polls on Election Day.
Okay, that was me. This is Lindsay over at Lake Mills that had that question. My reason for that question is when I was